Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Brookings Institution and the America Society Council of the Americas, for we hope will be a very interesting discussion on the complex reality that faces us on the U.S. Mexico border when it comes to our security, our trade, and our borderland communities. This is a project that arose out of a conversation that my colleague Eric Farnsworth at America Society and Council of the Americas and I had last December when we started talking about how the border issue was resonating in politics, out on the campaign trail, in the national conversation, and also our sense that certain facts, certain issues were just getting lost in the national conversation. We were hoping that through this event, through starting a conversation here with our very distinguished panelists, we could try to really bring together people who know what the situation is on the border, recognizing that there's great experts in our country and in our Congress to help us think through the issue about what we actually face in the U.S. Mexico border. I won't go into any lengthy introductions. I'm going to let Eric introduce the first panel. I just wanted to say that if you want to tweet out during the event, people's handles are on the bio handout that you have. I also ask you to consult the handout. It has really extensive information on each of our panelists and really goes to show what a great group of people we have here today joining us. So the hashtag is hashtag U.S. Mexico border. And without much further ado, let me turn it over to Eric to introduce the first panel and get our conversation going.
Well, Harold, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to join you and your Brookings colleagues. And in fact, this has been a collaboration that we've engaged in, and I've been looking forward to it for a long time, in particular because I have so much respect for Harold, but also for the institution here, and I look forward to future activities as well, Harold. So thank you again. Thank you, all of you, for braving the Metro-less commute this morning. We also know it's a very busy day given the Super Tuesday results from yesterday, as well as the White House is announcing a Supreme Court pick today at 11 o'clock, we're told. So there's a lot of news going on, and we appreciate the fact that you've chosen to join some of your time on this very busy day with us this morning. I'm very pleased to welcome two congressmen who are experts in the topic of discussion today, Congressman Will Hurd to my immediate left and Congressman Beto O'Rourke to his left, to kick off today's discussion of trade and security at the nearly 2,000-mile border that the United States shares with Mexico. As all of you know, and as Harold alluded, questions of the security of U.S. borders, the effectiveness of border controls, and the importance of Mexico to the United States economy are becoming increasingly salient in the national conversation. From the Council of the Americas perspective, we've had an ongoing project on these issues for several years, and many of you have been involved in these issues directly as well. But heated political rhetoric can sometimes obscure the complexity of the reality, which is dominated by the growth of mutually beneficial trade at the cross-border level and also travel. This isn't an accident of history, rather the product of a peaceful and democratic hemisphere that has bet on deeper economic integration. And our North American neighbors are at the forefront of these efforts. Together with Canada, Mexico and the United States comprise one of the most competitive regional economic regions in the world, a fact that was emphasized just last week when the Prime Minister of Canada was here in Washington for an official visit. Between the United States and Mexico, each day some $1.5 billion in goods cross the border, totaling some $531 billion in two-way trade just last year and supporting millions of jobs in both countries. And just 3 weeks ago, as the congressmen are aware, and many of you as well, a very large U.S. delegation led by U.S. Vice President Biden traveled to Mexico City for the U.S.-Mexico high-level economic dialogue discussions, which is an annual bilateral forum aimed at further strengthening the dynamic bilateral economic relationship. And one of the topics of the HLED, as those of us who have been involved with it call it, the high-level economic dialogue, is borders, recognizing that our mutual economic well-being and health depends on a healthy border region. So this is getting attention at the very highest level, and we applaud both governments for doing that. But lest we think this is an issue solely for the United States and Mexico, I've just returned from Central America, and I can assure you that borders is an issue across the region, and if borders, in fact, are not managed appropriately, they can become obstacles to trade and growth rather than facilitators of trade and growth. And we want to talk about some of those issues this morning. So I'm looking forward to discussing these issues with, as I mentioned, two very knowledgeable leaders on these issues from the U.S. Congress, eloquent advocates for a balanced approach to the U.S.-Mexico border in terms of security and trade. Congressman Will Hurd represents Texas's 23rd district, which stretches some 800 miles from San Antonio to El Paso. That is a large district, ladies and gentlemen, along the U.S.-Mexico border. Congressman O'Rourke represents the 16th District of Texas and serves El Paso and the surrounding area as well. Both of them serve on the Committee on Homeland Security and have developed that increasingly rare phenomenon in Washington, a true bipartisan working relationship. And we congratulate and thank both of you for that. That's the photograph we want, actually, the two of them shaking hands. You have the copies of their biographies in your conference material, so I'm not going to go deeply into it, but let me just pique your interest a little bit by noting that Congressman Hurd's pre-congressional life is actually, much of it is classified. You might wonder why, but he actually spent nearly a decade as a CIA operative in the Middle East and in South Asia. So for those of you who are interested in exploring that a little bit more, I call your attention to his biography. Congressman O'Rourke has worked in internet startups and served in city council and also a city council of his hometown of El Paso, congressman, of course. More recently, he's also partnered with us, with the Council of the Americas, for a project in El Paso on the border, and we thank you again for that partnership. Welcome to you both. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please join me in welcoming both congressmen to the panel this morning. So I'd like to start the conversation with a broad question to both of you, it's really something that both of you have done a lot of thinking on, done a lot of legislating on, but the border is a really diverse area. I mean, we talk about the border as if it's one entity and it stretches almost 2,000 miles, but this is a living region. And one approach that might work in one area might not work in an approach to the other area. So from your individual perspectives, give us a sense of the state of the border today and what you think some strategies might be for making sure that the border as a region is serving the needs of both of our people and both of our countries. Why don't we start, Congressman Hurd, with you?
Sure. I think if we addressed your point, it'd be a lot better, right? What you need in San Diego is very different than what you need in Eagle Pass. And part of my frustration at times with the Department of Homeland Security is they approach border security, they try to have a one-size-fits-all solution along the border. And when you talk about the state of the border, the amount of trade that is increasing, it's increasing every single day. Place like Eagle Pass, Piedras Negras is on the other side. Constellation Brands, they produce beer. They send 100 million cases of beer to the United States every single year. They want to double that by 2017, all right? So are we prepared, is Customs prepared to have the people to facilitate that trade, to make sure a lot of that's coming on rail, can that get through our border? We have, a place like Presidio, where we're rebuilding bridges in order to get agricultural traffic through there. When you look at the infrastructure that's being built on the Mexico side to meet up with the United States, are our roads on the equivalent side, prepared to handle this amount of traffic? So I would say the state of the border is good because trade is growing. The people-to-people connections are always there. I say that border is not an edge, it's a middle, because these are one communities that we're having to deal with. And on the topic of border security, one thing that is, I think, a positive trend is the Department of Homeland Security. They call this the Southern Approaches, Borders and Approaches campaign, where they're looking at the border, trying to do intelligence-led operations, and they're running this out of Joint Task Force West in San Antonio. There's 19 criminal organizations in Mexico. If we focus on them before they get to the border, we could be a lot better off. If we're working with our Mexican partners to deal with some of these issues within Mexico and also on their southern border, if we improve that level of coordination, we can do a lot more. And I think an intelligence-led, thinking of border security from an intelligence-led perspective is going to make sure that we're using our resources in the most efficient way we possibly can. But unfortunately, as you said, the political rhetoric that's there. And guess what? It's always been there. Donald Trump's not the first one to say build a wall from sea to shining sea, right? And I tell people, that's the most expensive and least effective way of doing border security. And so one of the things I've been trying to do is get my colleagues to come see the border. Everybody wants to talk about it, but if you haven't seen it, you should, and take you into Juarez, have lunch, over there, go into places like Ojinaga, and see what's really going on. So I think it's good that there's conversation around this, and now I think events like this, and thank you for having us so that we can talk about this in a sober fashion.
Well, and I want to pursue several of those topics that you've already raised, but let's go to Congressman O'Rourke for your initial comments and thoughts, and then we can pursue some of these topics.
First of all, thank you for the invitation to join in to the Brookings Institute and Council of the Americas for your focus on this and trying to bring a rational, fact-based perspective to the border, which is in great need right now. I would agree with much of what Will has said in his description of the border. You have a part of America on the U.S. side where 6 million people live, from San Diego to Nogales to El Paso to Laredo down to Brownsville. El Paso, which I put at the center of the U.S.-Mexico border and in many ways the U.S.-Mexico relationship, is the safest city in the United States, and it has been for the last 4 or 5 years. And among other border communities, it is not an outlier. San Diego is in that top 10 safest cities list. And in fact, those Americans who live on the U.S. side of the U.S.-Mexico border are far safer than their counterparts in the average American city further into the interior. You also have a source of dynamic job growth and economic growth on the border. Just in the El Paso sector, you have about $90 billion of U.S.-Mexico trade passing through our ports of entry. That supports over 400,000 jobs in our home state of Texas, 1 out of every 4 jobs in the community that I represent, and is connected to 6 million U.S. jobs that are dependent on the U.S.-Mexico trade relationship. And then beyond what you can measure, the border is a fantastic, almost magical place where 2 countries, 2 peoples, 2 nations, 2 cultures, 2 languages come together and really form one history and one future for our shared interests in the United States and Mexico. And I don't know that you can quantify that, but it will be and has been the source of much of the success of this country, much of the success of the country of Mexico. And if we can capitalize on that and turn from a posture of anxiety and fear to one of hope and optimism at the opportunity that presents, I think that's going to be very, very good for the United States, very good, incidentally, for Mexico, and is something that I hope after this election season we can really turn to and begin to work on.
One of the words I've heard you use in the past describing exactly this phenomenon is the sense of community that you have, that just because there's a border that runs through some of these urban areas, it's actually a community on both sides of the border that really has pre-existed in some ways. Let me follow up with that just a little bit, and then we'll come back to Congressman Hurd. Congressman O'Rourke, you've been a real advocate and a champion, in fact, have had some success legislatively for finding creative ways for local communities to really address some of the problems that they face on a local basis, right? It's easy from a Washington or Mexico City perspective to have a certain perspective, but the folks who live and work and trade at the border also have a different perspective. Give us a sense of some of the initiatives you've pursued and some of the further steps that you think might be necessary.
Well, I mentioned the volume of trade coming through the El Paso Juarez ports of entry, just about $90 billion, almost 20% of all U.S.-Mexico trade. Absolutely connected to the jobs we have in El Paso and potential job growth in the future. So there's a very clear economic argument to continue to invest in those bridges from our local perspective and also nationally for those 6 million jobs that are connected to it. Unfortunately, as I was discussing with someone before we started, despite, I think, some of the best intentions in Washington, D.C., and people who are trying to do the right thing, unless you're from the border or understand those facts almost at a personal level, it's very hard to make policy or decisions that connect to that. And so in the void of federal leadership from this administration and past administrations, you have communities like El Paso, which happens to also be perhaps the 3rd or 4th poorest MSA metropolitan statistical area in the country. And yet, despite our poverty, because of our unique interest in that cross-border commerce and trade, we have invested a little over $1 million a year to supplement what CBP, Customs and Border Protection, invests in the border. So we, the citizens of El Paso, are paying the overtime for CBP officers so we can keep more of the lanes on more of those bridges open, more of the hours of the days that allow that trade to continue, and also the 32 million crossings that we had last year between Ciudad Juarez and El Paso. It's like the crossings we see between the District of Columbia and Virginia or Maryland. They really are two parts of one larger community. And if you look at it economically, if you look at it, I was talking to someone earlier who says when you're flying into El Paso International Airport and you're above those two cities, you really cannot see the dividing line. It looks like one metropolitan area, which functionally it is. It's 3 million people living there. So we have invested in personnel, and we now have the authority, thanks to legislation that was passed, to invest in infrastructure there, which, again, we will be the primary beneficiaries, but that benefit will extend to the rest of the state in the United States. We will invest in that to our benefit and to the benefit of the country. So when we don't have leadership from D.C., we'll take matters into our own hands and provide that leadership locally, and I think El Paso has been able to do that.
And is this a trend that you would see across the border, or is it kind of a pilot project for El Paso that's probably not going to be replicated elsewhere? What's your speculation along those lines?
There are other border communities who've taken advantage of these 559 and 560 programs, as they're called, that allow you to invest in personnel and infrastructure. Laredo is one. I believe in the San Diego area you've had some investment. So again, this is very much a federal responsibility, and we should hold the federal government accountable for that. But in the absence of that accountability and follow-through, you cannot just sit on your hands and hope that something will come down the line. You have to take the matter into your own hands. And again, El Paso, I think, despite an economic situation that doesn't allow for a lot of discretionary investment, is making that investment because we know it's going to produce a return almost immediately for us and for the rest of the country.
And you're seeing that program is being used at multiple locations, and it was an original 5-year pilot program, and we're trying to get it extended, and hopefully we'll get that sorted out this year so that we can continue doing it, because it's an important project. And what you're also starting to see is you're seeing businesses on the Mexican side and the U.S. side work together, plan together, talk about where they see things going so that they can say, this is the state that we're going to be in 2, 3, 4 years. How do we ensure the infrastructure is there to make that happen? And we also work together on the Coordinated Border Investment Initiative, where you can use highway trust fund dollars to provide infrastructure projects, trade projects along the border. So again, it's one more tool for the municipalities and the communities in these areas to do projects that's going to facilitate trade.
Well, and you've really gone precisely toward the direction that I wanted to continue the conversation, which is to say, by definition, a border is bringing two countries together. And, we could do everything we could possibly do on our side of the border, but if we're not seeing reciprocation or coordination or what have you, it's still not going to work. So from your perspective, and in your initial comments, you talked about intelligence-driven and data-driven security, which I think is a really interesting topic and something that we could certainly pursue. But that also requires cooperation with the Mexican government. So my question from your perspective as a border congressman, what sort of cooperation are you seeing from the other side of the border? Is the Mexican government as equally driven, no pun intended, to try to address some of these issues? Give us a sense of how that cooperation and interaction is occurring.
Well, I was in Mexico City a couple months ago. Border Trade Alliance was having an activity where we were trying to get everyone together, and aduanas, you name it, everybody was there to talk about what their initiatives are, and identifying people when there are some problems that you have that's keeping trucks or people moving, how you can escalate and resolve that situation. The growth and the roads that are being built on the Mexican side, I think, are moving at a little bit faster pace than on the U.S. side in some areas. So I think the interest is there, the focus on this is there. One of the things that the government of Mexico is doing is this una ventana, which is, you have one portal to do all your customs and facilitate.
Questions here in just a short bit, so be preparing that. But let me ask both of you the same question then before we go to the audience. Both of you have indicated that the region is different. It's not Washington, it's not Mexico City. It's unique, it's broad, and it differs along the length of the border. What would be the one thing, if you had the opportunity to put into the public consciousness in the United States, that you think people don't understand about the border, that you would like them to understand about the border, that they could take away? What would be the one thing, if there is one thing? Congressman Hurd, why don't we start with you?
I think Beto alluded to it, is that these are safe communities. Laredo is safe. El Paso is safe. Juarez is not the murder capital of the world, right? There are more homicides in Baltimore, Chicago, New Orleans than that, right? Now, there's a drug trafficking problem in central and northern Mexico, absolutely. But right now, today, many of these border communities are incredibly safe. People are going back and forth every single day. And, the images you see in movies like Sicario are not the reality right now.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say that the border has never been more secure in the history of the United States-Mexico border. You are today seeing record low numbers of apprehensions, under 400,000. Compare that to the start of this century, year 2000, you had 1.6 million plus apprehensions. And when we see surges in apprehensions, those are typically Central Americans turning themselves in, not trying to evade detection or apprehension. In the last 10 years, you've doubled the size of the Border Patrol from 10,000 to 20,000 agents. You've nearly tripled total border security spending to $18 billion. In 2005, just about 10 years ago, the average agent on the southern border made 106 apprehensions a year. Last year, the average agent made 17 apprehensions, and in the El Paso sector, the average agent made 6 apprehensions for the entire year. So you're really seeing the law of diminishing returns come into effect. And the consequence of continued obsession on border security is twofold. One, we will waste taxpayer resources on a problem that we really do not have. You talk to the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, the Director of the National Counterterrorism Center, the Director of the FBI. There has never been, nor is there now, any terrorist activity, plot, or action connected to the southern border. Doesn't mean we shouldn't remain vigilant against that, and we are. That $18 billion, those 20,000 agents, the preponderance of federal law enforcement that's located at the border is going to ensure that we are vigilant. But the second consequence is that when we are focused where the problem is not, we are taking our eye off the ball where the problem is, where terrorists do come into our country at our international airports, at student visa and visa overstays, at our northern border, and homegrown radicalization in communities throughout the country. And so we need to dispense with this myth that the border is insecure. It is as secure. I mean, the data, the facts tell us precisely that. It is more secure than it has ever been. And I think that more dollars spent get ever less, smaller, marginal improvements. It's really time to focus on, as Will says, the men and women in blue, the Customs and Border Protection officers who facilitate trade and lawful cross-border traffic and mobility there. That's when we really begin to realize the opportunity that we have on the border.
Now you know why we were so delighted to have both of these join us today. This is fantastic. I would love to continue this conversation myself, but we promised to bring in some folks from the audience. So why don't we take a round of 3 questions? We'll start right here. I believe we have circulating microphones, yes. And if you could please identify yourself by name and organization you're representing, that would be terrific. And if the question is directed at one particular congressman, please feel free to direct it accordingly.
I'm June Beidel. I'm with the Congressional Research Service. And Congressman Hurd, you referred to 19 criminal organizations in Mexico. I love to hear a number. I cover the Mexican organizations. So that's an interesting number to me. But my question is about local law enforcement. What are the communities on the border, particularly the sister cities, doing about those 19 organizations? And what kind of cooperation is happening locally? Many, many moons ago, I was in Piedras Negras and Eagle Pass working on chemical emergency response, which was a great program that we had running down there. Though we were coming from D.C., going down there to do it just on occasion as opposed to being from down there. But I'm very, very interested in what kind of cooperation is happening locally.
June, thank you very much. We'll go here in the back, or toward the back. Adam? Yep, right here. Adam.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Congressman. Your analysis is spot on. You've got low apprehensions. Spillover violence has not materialized. The terrorist threat, have to be vigilant, but hasn't happened. But one thing is going up, and it's drug seizures at the border. We're seeing sharp increases in methamphetamine, heroin in particular, maybe to some extent cocaine. Most of it made in Mexico, the meth and the heroin, and obviously causing quite an epidemic in the United States. And most of that, I should add, going through ports of entry, not between the ports of entry. What strategic shifts, what budget shifts, what change in priorities do we need to make to address that better?
Thanks very much. An important question. And there was a third question, I believe, right here. And yes, there we go.
Hi, Roger Libby with DHL, and thank you both for being here. Wanted to just say that I very much appreciate you. I heard a lot of comments, but I want to put it together and ask one question. You talked about physical infrastructure. That's critical, making sure they have the physical infrastructure for customs clearance at the border and the roads. There's the IT infrastructure, and I very much appreciate Congressman Hurd mentioning single window. Mexico is actually ahead of the United States on single window development. The U.S. is catching up, but making sure that the IT infrastructure is also interconnected and ideally getting toward a state where one country's export declaration is another country's import declaration and be filed once. And then the third part I didn't hear as much, but I wanted to raise, and that is the trade facilitation component. And Congressman O'Rourke, you mentioned this briefly, but we can only do so much investing in physical dollars. Eventually, we have to start looking at managing risk. And if there is low violence, and then you can say you need to deal with your crime elsewhere. But we also have, even within that border, where are the high-risk shipments and where are the low-risk shipments? And large companies, DHL and other international companies, which have very tight end-to-end supply chains, are in the secure programs, the trusted trader programs in the U.S. and in Mexico. And how do we try to make sure that we use those limited resources of stopping and inspecting every package on a truck for those about whom we know less, and for those whom we have trusted trader programs and we have great confidence in the security regimes, that we really do recognize their programs and try to push them through? Are you having conversations with U.S. Customs and with Mexican Customs to see how we can reduce the inspections on those companies that are in the trusted trader program to facilitate the trade within the infrastructure?
Yeah, the whole concept of risk management is a way to help facilitate rather than impede trade. Some really good questions here, and if we have time, we'll take another round, but let's go to Congressman Hurd to begin addressing some of these.
Sure. The local law enforcement cooperation. Right now, the Consul General from Nuevo Laredo is working on a program to do just that, to bring the local, not just law enforcement, but public defenders, judges, bring them, into a place like Eagle Pass and El Paso, and have conversations with their counterparts on best practices. And so I think some of the Merida funds are being used for this, because the larger problem with law enforcement, if you will, in Mexico, it's you got to have public defenders, you got to have jails that actually operate. When you look at some of the elements within the Mexican military, they're very good about when you put them on a target, they can seize that target and stop it, but it's all the other stuff. And I think there's some real opportunities for people to learn from each other on both sides of the border and understand what some of the concerns are on the Mexican side and how we can facilitate that. So I think this is a growing area. I don't think the conversations on a local, from local law enforcement are at a levels where they probably could be or should be. But one of the issues that you always have, and my friends in the intelligence communities are concerned with, is potential corruption within some of the folks that we're working with. The narcotraficantes are making conservatively $50 billion a year in the United States, right? That's a pretty big number, and that's a conservative number. And they're organized, they are well-financed, and so that's the threat that you're looking at. And when you look, roughly, the U.S. intelligence budget is $50 billion. And I think someone said it right, a lot of this stuff is coming through our ports of entry. And so this is a big problem, but the way we improve it is by increasing the people-to-people contacts, and one way to do that is with local law enforcement. You want me to hit the other?
Sure, go ahead.
The one question about how can we focusing on one of the things that we got to remember, and all of my friends in Mexico tell me, it's that you got to deal with, I know something about dealing with supply and stopping bad guys, but you got to deal with demand as well too. And that it's our money, it's our habits, our drug habits that are financing the drugs that are coming back and forth to the border. But again, the difference, when I was in the CIA, I was an undercover officer for 9.5 years. I was in India 2 years, Pakistan 2 years, New York City 2 years, Afghanistan for 1.5 years, chasing Al-Qaeda and Lashkar-e-Taiba and groups like this. The difference with the narco-traficantes in Mexico is they're not hiding in caves, right? A lot of times you know where they are, and this is a threat that we have to work closely with our Mexican partners to stop, and I think we can do that. And then the third question was about, one of the areas is, I'm drawing a blank on the name, it's where you're doing inspections in Mexico. We're doing inspections right now in the Dubai airport and clear customs there in order to facilitate. We're already doing that in a number of places in Canada. Some legislation was passed in Mexico that allowed our customs officers to carry their sidearm, which is going to make it a lot easier in order to accomplish that on the ground. If you're able to sort out 75% of known traffic and clear it at the points of origination and get it across the border and move it quickly, then you can focus on the elements at the border that may need additional scrutiny. And so extending this program, widening this program, is something that DHS is doing and working on.
Congressman O'Rourke.
Yeah, I'll just continue on that last point. I mean, I think the fact that CBP officers in these pre-clearance inspection programs that are being piloted in different locations along the border, including one in Santa Teresa, New Mexico, which is very close to our districts, that's a huge breakthrough. It is a huge victory over some very serious issues of sovereignty in Mexico. I mean, remember, we took about half their country not too long ago in the scheme of things, and for a U.S. federal officer to be carrying a weapon in Mexico today was something that many people didn't think was possible. Even a year ago, I was in an interparliamentary dialogue with counterparts in Mexico City, diputados in their legislature, who said this would never happen. So that's a huge victory. And in terms of facilitating trade, I agree that we cannot build enough infrastructure to solve the problem. We're going to have to be much smarter about our processes and procedures at the border. Pre-inspection is part of that. Harmonizing our entry-exit systems, perhaps taking a page from the U.S.-Canada relationship, where when you credit one country for an entry, you debit the other country's system at the same time. That makes too much common sense to me not to employ. And then I think we should invest beyond the trade component, these Sentry programs where we pre-clear people who cross our ports of entry. In El Paso, I mentioned 32 million crossings last year. Many of those people who are crossing don't have certified pre-inspection documents. So they're presenting documents each time, which takes a lot of time from the CBP officer, takes a lot of time for the bridge crosser, who could be in line for, if they're not in one of these Sentry lines, for 15 minutes or 3 hours. It's not predictable. We should fund the cost to do that background check for people who can't afford the $110, which is a lot of money, to pay for that themselves. We gain the security benefit from that. We gain improvement in logistics and wait times on our bridges. We gain a healthier, more rational border. So those are some areas that I would work on. And then on the really good question about drug flows, this isn't the solution, but this is part of it. We absolutely must legalize marijuana in this country and be done with it. We can then focus federal law enforcement exclusively on much more dangerous drugs like methamphetamines, like heroin, like cocaine, that continue to cross our border, and I think be more effective in our interdiction. But interdiction is only really a small part of the strategy. I agree wholeheartedly with Will that we need to look at ourselves and the demand side. We have to stop pointing the finger at the rest of the Americas, whether it is Mexico, whether it is Central America, whether it's Colombia or Peru, and somehow blame them for our problems that they are only feeding based on the demand. I really think that we need to take ownership of our culpability in this and begin to look at solutions within the United States. I think we have caused, with the best of intentions, untold harm on Mexico, continuing today in Central America. I mean, there's a reason that these countries have been so destabilized for so long, where we've had such critical problems in governance, where we've had impunity, as Angela knows, in the streets of Juarez, where people could kill, brutalize, torture, kidnap, rain terror upon that city with complete impunity. And that breakdown in civil society, in governance, that rise in corruption is connected to a drug trade that, again, unintentionally, was partially caused by U.S. prohibitionary policies that created such a premium on a much-used drug like marijuana that people were literally willing to die or kill to bring it across in the United States. And I kind of paraphrase John Kerry's famous question from the Vietnam era: who's going to be the last kid in Ciudad Juarez to die to bring a shipment of marijuana into the United States, where more than half the country has already decided that it should be legal? So this end of prohibition for marijuana, at least, is only moving in one direction. The faster we get there, the better for us, the better for our partners in the hemisphere, and certainly much better for our efforts to interdict much harder, much more harmful drugs like the ones that you mentioned.
So much here that I'd love to follow up on. I mean, I'd love to take all day and continue the conversation. We regrettably don't have the time. No, yeah, you have to get back to the Hill, and we have the rest of the program to continue with. But before I ask for your thanks to the two congressmen, I also wanted to thank again Brookings Institution for this terrific collaboration, and also thank Kezia McKeag from the Council of the America staff for her hard work to put this program together. So with that, please join me in thanking the two congressmen for the terrific comments.
Well done. Yeah,